All right, today we're going to talk about a tuner. Now, much like a string on a guitar that's out of tune, coffee that hasn't been ground correctly is going to be out of tune as well. And so the grinder is not just an important tool, it is a fundamental tool for great coffee. And I wanted to talk about that today. In fact, the most important thing you can have for making coffee is having a really good grinder. The ability to brew coffee, if you've got an uneven extraction because your guitar is out of tune and your coffee is not ground evenly, you're not going to have consistent results. You might get lucky and have a decent grind out of just possibility, but they make some really great grinders out there. Now here's a few selections. I'm going to go rummaging around in the kitchen for another option. You may have in your kitchen one of these things, and a Magic Bullet with a blade grinder can and does grind coffee. You can see that there is coffee that was ground in a Magic Bullet with that blade grinder. What ends up happening is you get boulders and fines. Boulders are large particles and fines are little tiny particles, much like coarse sea salt and fine table salt, or even finer than that. And if you're trying to brew coffee with that, this is not going to give you the most even extraction and inconsistent results. And you might have like an overly bitter cup or a overly sour cup and think, oh man, what do I need to do? Well, the least expensive but really a great option is a manual hand grinder, and there's a little dial on here for fine tuning just how coarse you want your coffee, and something like around 186 or 187 turns, you're going to have a cup of coffee. Nice and quiet, but the labor involved is something to take into consideration. However, the extraction on this is great because the consistency on it is wonderful. Now, this is a dedicated espresso grinder. I use it only for espresso, and espresso has nothing to do with the type of coffee. It's the method in which it's brewed, and it's brewed very quickly, and the quicker the time, the smaller the grind. And this is an espresso grind that is almost close to powder. This is my go-to grinder for pour-over or French press coffee, and this is my coffee that I'm going to use for a pour-over, and it is not too much different than table salt. For kosher salt size, which is like that, we're going to use a grind setting that's very similar to that for a French press. Now, this particular grinder does a really wonderful job in that it doesn't create a lot of powder. You'll find in cheap grinders that you'll get a lot of powder and residue. Again, the boulders and fines. The ability of the coffee to take a whole bean and bring it down to a size that's usable happens from a couple of different functions. Like I mentioned, there's a dial adjustment for this, and the two burrs that sit in there get closer. Like there's a burr on the top and a cone underneath, and as they sit down into there, it starts to shave the coffee, and those discs that happen from it shaving allow the water to get in there evenly and then dissolve the yummy goodness that's inside really well. Manual grinders date back to centuries. You could use a mortar and pestle. Again, you're going to get boulders and fines and uneven extraction. That being said, grinding your coffee with a Magic Bullet blade grinder is still better than any K-Cup with a fresh roasted coffee. The extraction and freshness and level of being able to grind your coffee right before brewing it is critically important. Now, having a investment into your grinder, you could use a simple $10 Melita pour over or a $20 French press. You can use some really inexpensive brewing apparatus and get excellent results. My favorite, the AeroPress, is like $35, but I've invested into a good grinder. I'll share a link later about my highest recommendation for a coffee grinder for your home. So back to the purpose of this. This is a tuner for your coffee. Your great, beautiful coffee that you've purchased from Bridge Coffee Company, you want it to get an excellent cup. The best results you're going to get from that is from a quality grinder, because it's going to put it into tune with the beautiful notes that coffee has.